Sustainability. It's got to be the most abused word in the English language today. It's got to the point where it means absolutely nothing. It's been variously used to describe everything from tuna right the way through to tourism. Here's a classic example. This is Fiji water. I came across it in a Chicago hotel room. It wasn't so much the price that made me wince, but the assertion that it's carbon negative. If you go onto the company's website, there's a whole page devoted to their sustainability. It talks about how they use the most responsible plastic, the most efficient ocean transport, how they operate from the most energy efficient factories. But how in anybody's logic can it make sense to move water from an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean to a hotel room halfway around the world in Chicago? A hotel room with a view over the 6th largest freshwater lake in the world. And that's the problem with sustainability. As a concept, it's abused, it's incredibly difficult to define, and it's incredibly difficult to value and put a measure on. The planet has undergone incredible pressure from human population growth in the last century. Population is growing at 2 people a second. That's 200,000 people a day. Indeed, in the next week, we're going to hit the milestone of 7 billion people on the planet. All of those people have an insatiable demand for finite resources, not least land, a diminishing resource. We're losing land at the rate of 470 hectares of productive agricultural land every hour. And it's not just about the actual numbers, it's about equity as well. The bulk of the environmental damage we see around us today is the result of the 20% of the world population who jumped onto the industrial bandwagon in the 1800s. That still leaves the 80% who are still trying to clamber their way up that development ladder. Whether it's East Africa, where population is growing at 4% a year, where they aspire to lift themselves out of poverty, to earn more than $1 a day, to aspire to a house rather than a mud hut, and possibly even one day on a bicycle. Or whether it's China, where they're slightly further up that development ladder, where they want to turn that bicycle now into a scooter or even a motorcycle. And everybody is aspiring for the American dream. A lifestyle that is so unsustainable it would require 3 planets to support. This is Ed. Ed is very much the ex-military officer. He's responsible for security on a large ex-colonial estate in Kenya. One of his responsibilities is to deal with 300 squatters who've moved on to part of the estate and have been there for a number of decades. I spent a fascinating morning with Ed, walking around the squatter camp, talking to the residents in the camp and to Ed. And it was while we were talking about the whole rapid population increase in Africa that he sort of summed it up as he saw it. He said, what do you expect? These people have got no land to farm, they've got no job to go to, they've got nothing to do all day but make babies. Ed's comment was pretty tongue-in-cheek, but there is a big element of truth to it. Invariably, where economic development takes place, population growth starts to fall, family sizes increase. We've already seen that in much of the developed world, where populations have already plateaued, and in some cases, as in Europe, are starting to decrease. The 2 areas still responsible for population growth are Africa and Asia, but even they are inextricably on a pathway that will see their populations plateau and eventually, in some cases, start to fall by the middle of the century. So the population time bomb has effectively been diffused, but it's left us with a huge difficulty. If you look at population growth in the last century, it prescribes a hockey stick. And you can find this hockey stick everywhere, whether it's temperature increases, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, extinction rates, methane emissions, nitrous oxide emissions. The effect of that runaway acceleration in population in the last century has had a massive effect on the environment as a whole. And that impact has effectively taken us to a milestone. In 1976, we reached the point at which the ecological footprint of mankind matched the biocapacity of the planet. That effectively was the end of sustainability. It effectively meant we'd reached the point where we're no longer living off the interest, but we're starting to draw down on all the capital. The challenge is to reverse that hockey stick curve, to bend the curve, and return us back to the point at which we're living within the resources of one planet. Production is going to be increased from a diminishing resource base, whether it's land, nutrients, or every other resource that's important to agriculture. There is some spare capacity in terms of land available out there, but it's limited. Estimates put it at around 400 million hectares. To put that into context, the rate we're losing land through a combination of soil degradation, urbanisation, biofuels, the shift to conservation, will utilise that 400 million hectares alone by 2030. So the challenge has got to be for agriculture to produce more from either the existing resource base or a reduced resource base. And the good news is that there's huge latent potential out there. Whether it's the Ukraine, where 26% of agricultural land is not planted, where 40,000 of the country's 47,000 combines date back to the Soviet era, and variously leave anywhere between 20 and 40% of the crop in the field. Whether it's Africa, where the average wheat yield is typically less than 2 tons a hectare, or whether it's China, where the village dairy herd is generally producing less than 2,000 litres a cow. There is huge latent potential. Additionally, there is massive technological development opportunities out there, new concepts and new ideas. Whether it's the use of algae, an organism that's capable of producing biomass 100 times faster than most conventional plants, whether it's our greater understanding of biological systems and ecology that allow us to take advantage of natural opportunities for pest and disease control, whether it's the growing arsenal of tools we have to better understand plant genetics and to increase the rate at which we improve plant varieties. There are huge opportunities, but all of them demand a healthy and effective research and development model. A model that takes basic discoveries from the laboratory, turns them into strategic research, eventually into applied research, and then through demonstration and extension, put them into it in front of industry. Every step of the way, for that to be a healthy model, there should be feedback and there should be innovation with it. What I found as I went around the world, and I visited over 15 universities around the world, was a trend. You would invariably make contact with an individual in the university that might well be a soil scientist. They would introduce you to every soil scientist on their floor, but they would never consider taking you to the agricultural economists on the floor above, or the livestock nutritionists on the floor below. There's a silo mentality within academia around the world, and that does not lend itself to the challenges of sustainability. If sustainability is about anything, it's about large-scale integrated systems, cross-disciplinary approaches, large-scale investigation, and often investigation that goes over a long time scale. In the UK, it can be argued things are even worse. The applied research of the type that used to be funded by DEFRA, the resources have largely been focused onto basic research of the type funded by BBSRC. We've effectively, in the UK, wound up with a research chain that starts and stops at basic research, and then hopes that through knowledge transfer, those basic ideas will be picked up by industry and deployed. The reality is, though, that many of those discoveries simply sit on the shelf in laboratories, And worse still, much of that research tends to be the result of academic curiosity rather than the real needs of industry. There were a number of things that kept reoccurring as I went through my Nuffield, not least the need to fix that research model, to reconnect the various elements. Integration, time and time again, I kept coming across the notion that sustainability is about systems. And they're systems that go beyond the boundaries of agriculture. So whether it's nutrients you're looking at, it's not just about the recycling of nutrients within agriculture. It's what's happening to those nutrients beyond agriculture boundaries amongst the urban population. And there's a desperate need to create a measure and a value for sustainability. It's a concept that it isn't considered when we start to discuss financial motivation. In 1968, John F. Kennedy, in a really elegant deconstruction of modern economics, said that gross domestic product measures absolutely everything except that which is worthwhile to life. And that is particularly true with sustainability. Somehow we need to commoditize the sustainability values. In terms of my own experience, I focused a lot of my study on nutrients. Fertilizer is one of agriculture's most important resources, but it's also one of the main reasons why agriculture is often considered to be unsustainable. In Canada, I came across these two guys on the left. They were working on developing equipment that was capable of dewatering slurries from pig units, of then converting that material into concentrated forms of nutrients. I've continued to talk to these guys, and I set about looking for equipment that was sitting on shelves in labs in the UK, and came across the piece of kit on the right. This has now been deployed at Harper. In fact, it was done yesterday. It moved to Harper. And with a bit of help from funding from the Technology Strategy Board, we're setting to on a project which will investigate whether we can do something similar, whether we can scavenge nitrogen, slurry, and other industrial effluents to create a high-value concentrated liquid fertilizer. What I began to see as I travelled around the world was a much larger and fascinating debate than I'd ever originally expected. I got a glimpse of the infinite elements that intertwine to create a global farm. And for that opportunity, I will always be eternally grateful to Nuffield, but especially my sponsor, Harper. Nuffield's really given me the tools and confidence to think on a global scale, and in particular, to think big. Thank you.